Sealed with a strip of masking tape that had yellowed at the edges, a white envelope sat in the inside pocket of Steve Harvey's suit jacket for the entire first half of the Family Feud taping on March 20th, 2020. It had no stamp, no return address, just a name written in blue ballpoint ink, in handwriting that leaned slightly to the right, the way a left-handed person's writing leans when they've been taught to compensate. Ruth. The envelope had been handed to Steve backstage by a man named Pastor Vernon Webb, 63, from Macon, Georgia, who had kept it in a fireproof safe for 4 years and 11 months because a dying man had placed it in his hands in a hospice room on April 9, 2015, and said, "Give this to her when she's ready. She'll know when she's ready. Don't you dare open it." The dying man was Sergeant James Odom, 52, United States Marine Corps, retired. Ruth Odom was his wife. She was standing at the Family Feud podium, 40 feet from Steve's jacket pocket, answering questions about what people argue about in the car, with no idea that the last words her husband ever wrote were resting against Steve Harvey's heartbeat. March 20th, 2020, a Friday afternoon in Atlanta, one of the final tapings before the pandemic would shut production down for months. The Odom family, Ruth, 51, her daughter Maya, 24, her son Elijah, 21, her sister Linda, 48, and her mother Constance, 74, stood at the right podium in white. The competing family, the Fitzgerald family from Birmingham, Alabama, Patrick Fitzgerald, 55, his wife Joan, their son Thomas, 28, their daughter Claire, 25, and Patrick's brother Sean, 52, stood at the left podium in green. During introductions, Steve asked Ruth how long she'd been a fan of the show. Ruth said, "My husband and I watched it every Friday night for 22 years. It was our thing." Steve said, "Where's your husband tonight?" Ruth's chin lifted, a small motion, a reflex of composure that had been practiced so many times it had become bone. "He passed away almost 5 years ago." Steve nodded, respectful, and moved on. But he didn't move on. His hand drifted to the left side of his jacket, where the envelope sat, and pressed flat against it for 1 second before returning to his side. Nobody noticed except Maya, who had helped arrange all of it, and who was standing at the podium trying not to look at her mother because she knew that if she did, she would break before the moment arrived. James Odom enlisted in the Marines at 18, served 2 tours in the Gulf War, was decorated for valor in combat operations near Kuwait City in 1991, and came home with a Bronze Star and a set of memories he folded into a locked drawer in his mind and never opened in front of his family. He met Ruth Tillman at a church barbecue in Macon in 1993. She was 24. He was 25. She was studying to become an elementary school art teacher. He was working as a diesel mechanic at a trucking company while taking night classes in business administration. They married in 1995. Maya was born in 1996, Elijah in 1999. James built a modest auto repair shop on the east side of Macon that grew from a 1-bay garage to a 4-bay operation with 6 employees over 15 years. Ruth taught art at Ingram Pye Elementary for 20 years. Friday nights were theirs. Every Friday, after the kids were in bed, James and Ruth sat on the couch, turned on Family Feud, and shared a bowl of butter pecan ice cream. For 22 years. The show was their decompression chamber, the place where the week dissolved, and they were just 2 people laughing at survey answers in their living room. In October 2014, James was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The oncologist at Coliseum Medical Center in Macon said the median survival time was 3 to 6 months. James was 51 years old. He had never been sick. He had never missed a day of work. He had rebuilt truck engines with broken fingers. And now, a doctor in a white coat was telling him that the body that had survived the Gulf War and 25 years of manual labor was being consumed from the inside by a disease with a 7% 5-year survival rate. James told Ruth that evening. They were sitting on the couch. Family Feud was on. James muted the television, took her hands, and said it plainly, the way he said everything, without decoration, without softening, because James believed that the truth deserved to be spoken in its actual shape. Ruth didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She squeezed his hands until her knuckles went white and said, "Then we fight." James looked at her and said something she wouldn't understand until years later. "I've already started." And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. He didn't mean fighting the cancer. He meant the letter. James began writing the letter the night of his diagnosis. He wrote it in a composition notebook at the kitchen table after Ruth fell asleep. The same way he had always worked on the shop's books, alone, late, by the light above the stove. He wrote slowly because he was left-handed, and his handwriting was difficult, and he wanted every word to be legible. He wrote and crossed out and rewrote. He tore pages from the notebook and started over. Over the next 5 months, as the chemotherapy hollowed him out and the cancer advanced, and his weight dropped from 210 to 141 pounds, James wrote 23 drafts of a single letter. The final version was 4 pages long. He sealed it in a white envelope on March 28, 2015. He wrote Ruth on the front. He gave it to Pastor Vernon Webb during what would be his final coherent visit, 12 days before he died, and said, "Give this to her when she's ready." James Odom died on April 9, 2015, at 7:14 p.m. in a hospice bed at Pine Point Hospice in Macon. Ruth was holding his left hand. Maya was holding his right. Elijah was standing at the foot of the bed. Constance was in the hallway, praying. The last thing James said, according to the hospice nurse, was Ruth's name. Just her name. Not a sentence, just Ruth. Pastor Webb kept the letter. He checked on Ruth monthly. He watched her grieve. Watched the first year of fog, the second year of anger, the third year of negotiation with God that sounded more like argument, the fourth year of fragile reassembly. He never mentioned the letter. James had said, "When she's ready," and Webb understood that readiness was not something he could determine. It was something Ruth would signal without knowing she was signaling it. The signal came in December 2019, when Maya called Pastor Webb and said, "Mama put up the Christmas tree this year. First time in 5 years. She bought butter pecan ice cream. She watched Family Feud on Friday. She laughed." Maya paused. "She laughed, Pastor Webb. She's ready." The audience thought that was the peak. They were wrong. Ruth threw herself into the game. She was fast. She was funny. She had the kind of competitive energy that comes from a woman who has spent 5 years learning to occupy a room alone, and is finally remembering what it feels like to take up space for joy instead of survival. The Odom family won the first 3 rounds. They were headed to fast money. The audience was on their feet. Ruth was grinning. A full, unguarded, teeth-showing grin that Maya hadn't seen in 5 years. After the fast money round, which the Odom family won with 212 points, Steve stopped the celebration. Not abruptly, gently. He let the confetti fall. He let the screaming happen. He let Ruth hug Maya and Elijah and Linda and Constance. Then he walked to center stage. "Ruth," Steve said, Come here for a minute." Ruth walked to center stage, still smiling, wiping confetti from her hair. Steve looked at her for a long moment. Longer than television allows, longer than a host should pause. And the audience felt the shift. The energy in the room changed the way air changes before a storm. Not colder, but heavier. Steve would later call what happened next the most important moment of his career. "Ruth, your daughter Maya contacted our production team 3 months ago. She told us something about you and James. She told us about Friday nights, about the ice cream, about this show." Ruth's smile faded into something cautious, uncertain. "She told us that this was the first year you watched Family Feud again, the first year you laughed on a Friday night. And she told us that there's someone here who's been waiting for that." Steve turned toward the side of the stage. Pastor Vernon Webb walked out from behind the curtain. He was holding a white envelope. Ruth saw it. She saw the masking tape. She saw the handwriting, the leftward lean she had read on birthday cards, grocery lists, and love notes for 22 years. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her legs locked and then unlocked, and she staggered, and Maya, who had been waiting for exactly this moment, was already moving, already behind her mother, already catching her. "James gave this letter to Pastor Webb 5 years ago," Steve said. His voice was rough. "He wrote it during his treatment. 23 drafts. He sealed it and said, 'Give this to her when she's ready.'" The studio fell completely silent. Ruth was shaking. Not her hands, her entire body. She looked at the envelope in Pastor Webb's hands the way a person looks at something that is simultaneously the most precious and most terrifying object in the world. Webb stepped forward. He held the envelope out to Ruth. His hands were steady, the hands of a man who had carried this weight for 5 years and was finally setting it down. "He asked me to wait," Webb said, "so I waited." Ruth took the envelope. She held it with both hands. She stared at her name in James's handwriting, and her thumbs traced the letters, and her face dissolved. She pulled the envelope against her chest and bent double, and the sound she made was not crying. It was deeper than crying, older than crying, the sound of a woman hearing her dead husband's voice in the shape of his handwriting on a piece of paper she didn't know existed. "Do you want to read it?" Steve asked gently. "You don't have to. Not here. Not now." Ruth straightened. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at Steve with eyes that were red and swollen and absolutely certain. "He wrote it to be read," she said. "I'll read it." She broke the masking tape. She unfolded 4 pages of notebook paper covered in blue ink, left-handed script, words that a dying man had written 23 times to get right. The studio was so quiet that the sound of the paper unfolding was audible in the balcony. Ruth read silently for a moment. Then she read aloud. She read fragments, not the whole letter because some words belong only to the person they were written for, and Ruth instinctively knew which lines were for the world and which were for her. She read, "You always said I wasn't good with words and you were right, but I'm writing this because I need you to know that the best part of my life was not the shop, not the Marines, not any of it. The best part was Friday nights." Her voice broke. She steadied. "The best part was sitting next to you while you pretended to like butter pecan because I liked it. I always knew you preferred chocolate. You ate butter pecan for 22 years because it was my favorite." Ruth stopped reading. She looked up at Maya. "He knew?" Maya nodded, tears streaming. "He always knew, Mama." Ruth pressed the letter against her chest again. She couldn't continue. Steve knelt beside her. Not in front of her, beside her, the way a person kneels when they want to be next to someone, not above them. "Let me tell you something," Steve said. His voice was barely a whisper. An old man at a gas station told me once, "God's got a plan bigger than your pain." I've said that a lot. But right now, standing here watching you hold those pages, I understand it differently than I've ever understood it. James wrote that letter while he was dying. He wrote it 23 times. And he didn't give it to you. He gave it to a pastor and said, "Wait," because he knew you. He knew you'd need time. He knew you'd need to laugh again before you could read his words without it destroying you. Steve put his hand on Ruth's shoulder. That man loved you from beyond the grave, Ruth. He timed his love. He set it on a delay, so it would arrive exactly when you could hold it. But Steve wasn't done. He stood and pulled out a phone. He dialed a number Maya had provided. A man named Staff Sergeant Luis Reyes answered. James's best friend from the Marines, the man who had been in the vehicle next to James during the Kuwait City advance in 1991. Reyes lived in San Antonio. He had not spoken to Ruth since the funeral. "Luis," Steve said, "I'm standing next to Ruth right now. She just read James's letter. And I think there's something you need to tell her." Luis's voice came through the speaker, thick with emotion. "Ruth, James called me the week before he died. He told me about the letter. He said he wrote it because you always joked that he never told you how he felt. He said, she spent 22 years eating ice cream she doesn't even like just to sit next to me. The least I can do is write it down." Luis paused. "He made me promise to check on you every year. I've been calling your mama every April. I'm sorry I didn't call you directly. I didn't think I could handle hearing your voice." Ruth was on the floor. Maya was beside her. Elijah was behind her, his hand on her back, shaking. Constance was at the podium with both hands raised, praying in the silent, full-body way that grandmothers pray when language is insufficient. Linda was holding Shirley, holding the podium, with white knuckles and tears streaming. Steve turned to camera one. "Everyone watching at home right now, tell them, whatever you're carrying, whatever you think they already know, whatever you're putting off because you'll do it tomorrow, write it down, say it out loud, record it on your phone. Because James Odom wrote a letter 23 times to get 4 pages right. And those 4 pages just did something 5 years after his death that a living voice couldn't do. They reached across the grave and held his wife one more time." Steve looked at the audience. "Don't wait." The crew was destroyed. A sound engineer had removed her headphones and was sitting with her back against the console. A camera operator was filming the ceiling because he couldn't point the camera at Ruth without losing composure entirely. The stage manager, the same woman who had sat on the floor twice that season, was standing perfectly still with tears running into her collar, holding the clipboard at her side like a soldier holding a flag. Patrick Fitzgerald crossed the stage. He took Ruth's hand and helped her stand. Joan followed. Thomas and Claire followed. Sean followed. The entire Fitzgerald family surrounded the Odom family in a circle that nobody organized and everybody understood. Patrick said, "My father wrote my mother a letter before every deployment. She kept them in a hat box. I didn't know love had weight until I picked up that box." Ruth looked at him and nodded. The nod of one person recognizing another across the specific, narrow bridge of shared grief. Steve awarded both families $20,000. He paid the Fitzgeralds' share from his own pocket. He announced the creation of the Last Letter Project, seeded with $250,000 from the Steve Harvey Foundation, dedicated to helping terminally ill patients write, record, and preserve messages for their families, providing writing assistance, video recording services, and secure storage so that love letters, apologies, advice, and goodbyes could arrive when the recipient was ready to receive them. Steve looked at Ruth, clutching 4 pages of blue ink against her chest with both hands, and said 5 words. "Love doesn't need a heartbeat." The clip was uploaded that evening, one of the last clips from the pre-pandemic season. Within 48 hours, 68 million views. Within 6 weeks, 341 million across all platforms. The hashtag #LastLetter trended in 54 countries for 14 days. Hospice organizations across the country contacted the Steve Harvey Foundation requesting partnership with the Last Letter Project. The project received $25.8 million in its first 18 months and helped 6,200 terminally ill patients create preserved messages for their families. Ruth Odom read the full letter alone that night in her hotel room in Atlanta, sitting on the bed with a cup of butter pecan ice cream from the hotel gift shop. She read it 3 times. She later told Maya that the letter contained 11 things she didn't know James knew about her. The chocolate ice cream preference, the fact that she hummed in her sleep, the way she always touched the left side of her face when she was thinking. "He was watching me for 22 years, Ruth said, "and I thought he wasn't paying attention." Maya said, "Mama, he was paying the most attention of anyone in the room. He just paid it quietly." In a 2022 interview with Robin Roberts, Steve was asked about the letter. Steve said, "I've had a lot of moments on that show, big moments, loud moments. That one was the quietest moment I've ever been part of, because it wasn't about me. It wasn't about the game. It was about a man who knew he was dying and spent his last months making sure his wife would know she was loved. Not when he could tell her, when she could hear it." Robin asked if Steve had ever written a letter like that. Steve looked directly into the camera and said, "I'm going home tonight and writing one." Today, Ruth Odom is 55 years old. She still teaches art at Ingram Pie Elementary in Macon. She still watches Family Feud on Friday nights. She eats chocolate ice cream now, her actual favorite, but she keeps a pint of butter pecan in the freezer. Every April 9th, the anniversary of James's death, she takes it out and eats 1 spoonful. Maya is 28 and works as the program director for the Last Letter Project's Georgia chapter. Elijah is 25 and manages the auto repair shop his father built. 4 bays, 8 employees now. The letter lives in a frame on Ruth's bedside table. Not the whole letter, just 1 page, the last page, the only page Ruth has ever allowed anyone to read. It ends with a sentence that James Odom wrote and rewrote 23 times until every word was exactly right. "You never liked the ice cream, Ruth, but you sat there every Friday for 22 years. That's not patience. That's the realest love I've ever seen. And I saw it every single time." A white envelope sat in a fireproof safe for 5 years because a dying man knew his wife wasn't ready. He knew because he had spent 22 years watching her. Not the way people watch television, but the way a person watches the thing they cannot live without, memorizing it, studying it, trying to write down what it means before the pen runs out. Some love arrives on time. Some love arrives late. And some love is sealed in an envelope and handed to a pastor with instructions to wait. Because the man who wrote it understood that grief has a clock, and that the letter needed to arrive not when he finished it, but when she could finally open it without being destroyed by what was inside. The realest love isn't the kind that speaks the loudest. It's the kind that waits. If this story reminded you that there are words you haven't said, and that someday it might be too late to say them, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell. Every week we bring you stories about the things people carry, the words they leave behind, and the moments when love reaches across time and holds on. Subscribe. The next story might be the one that makes you write your own letter tonight. 1.